Welcome to the Craft to Career podcast with Elizabeth Chappell, where every week we dive into how you can turn your craft into a successful career. Get ready to have the career you've always dreamed of.
Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the Craft to Career podcast. I am Elizabeth Chappell of Quilters Candy and the host of the show. This week, I am excited to share one of the most recent reviews, and there are some really great new reviews. Thank you all for taking time to stop and leave a review. I've actually been able to book some guests coming up because of the reviews. So you are benefiting from this. It's helping you to have a better podcast. If you've not left a review yet, take a second and go leave a review. This review comes from Sarah Soes. Sarah says, I love listening to Craft to Career. Elizabeth's latest episode featured Krista Watson and was full of ideas on letting go of imposter syndrome and following your dreams. Krista really talked about hit and misses in her quilting career, and after that episode, I felt encouraged to keep going in my pursuit of my quilt designing business. Thank you. So yes, this was episode 100, and Krista Watson did. She shared, it was such a fun episode, and Krista is very successful, but it was so nice to hear the reality of what it looked like for her when she went through some hard times in her business. Oftentimes we look at like, wow, look at where you are, but we don't talk about the struggles and the things that, maybe didn't go so well. So I really did appreciate that in Krista's episode as well. So thank you, Sarah Soes, for that review. And this week I have a guest on the show who is a friend of mine who we actually met because of the podcast. She reached out to me after an episode. I don't even remember which one. It's been a while now. And we've been friends ever since. And she has such a cool history and background in the quilting community. I don't want to spoil anything, so we'll jump in. You can listen to what she's done. But she has had a really unique way of having success in her career with hosting retreats and teaching. And this is something that I've not done. And this was a very unique business idea. So I'm excited to have Verna of the Vintage Spool here on the podcast. And let's jump in and you can meet Verna. Well, Verna, I am so excited to have you here. You've been a dear friend of mine, and now I get to have you on the podcast. So thank you.
I'm so excited, Elizabeth. I love the podcast, and I was so excited when I found it. And I don't think I started from the beginning, but I definitely went back and listened to every single episode. And every time I listen to it, I enjoy it so much and I learn something. So I'm so honored to be a guest today. I'm excited to share a bit about my journey because I feel like all the folks that have shared, I've gotten something out of it. So it's exciting to think that I might be able to help someone else who's interested in doing something like this. So
yeah. Well, and for the listeners too, I hope they can appreciate. You have such a cool style. So I have this pair of jeans here that you told me about from Anthropologie. And I've had people ask, where'd you get those? I'm like, oh yeah, Verna told me about those. And we both love the May like mice. And we just have like a connection over some of these kinds of things.
We do. And I'm really good at spending my friends' money. Hey, you need this.
Yes, you are good at that.
Just this weekend, I was quilting with two really good friends. And I'm like, ooh, look at this collection. You might need to have this one.
I love it. But I am glad. I forgot actually that you had reached out, I think because of the podcast, and we have become friends and connected because of that. So this is really fun to remember that. But you have a really unique experience and history in the quilting world. And so I'd love, just from a bird's eye view, if you tell our listeners, what have you done in the quilting industry?
Absolutely. So I started as a customer. I was intrigued by quilting and I wanted to learn how. And so I was just going to take a class at the local adult school. I didn't realize that quilting was this world out there. I'd done a lot of creative things. And luckily my mom she's a real estate broker, and she had a customer, and she went to do a sign off one night. Like they were going to sign some papers, and the husband said, oh, no, we can't do Thursday night. That's my wife's quilting night. And she said, quilting, my daughter wants to get into that. She's interested in learning. And so that lady, very lovely lady, gave my mother 3 stores for me to check into. I convinced my husband to go to one of them because we were in the vicinity. It was like a half an hour from my home. Jumped in there and I was like, whoa, I did not know these places existed. This is amazing. So I signed up for the very first class. I remember looking up at the quilt, the girl telling me, well, you have to start here. And I was already like, yeah, that's not the quilt I want. But if I have to start there, I will start there. And so I took a 12-week course. It was a sampler course. And I learned the fundamentals of quilting. And it was the best thing ever. I was really lucky. I got to take this course from a local Bay Area. She'd authored many books on the subject. She was an amazing quilter and just an absolute lovely person and so kind. And I just got an awesome start. After that, I was going to take the next course that followed, and it was full. The place I would take classes at was really thriving and would always fill, their classes would fill. So one of the shop girls working in the shop, she recommended that I jump into this drop-in class and, just jump in. And I just remember thinking, I don't know enough to go into a class with these experienced quilters. No, you can do it. You can do it. And so I did. And it was amazing. There were so many women in that course that knew so much more than me. And I'm like pretty gutsy. So I just jumped right in, head down, started working. About 3 months into like coming every week, this woman looks over and she's like, how long have you been quilting? And I'm like, oh, this is my second quilt. No way. So I got to know those ladies and I loved that atmosphere. I think that was my first experience of realizing how giving the quilting community was. They were willing to share supplies and tell you where they got a fabric. And, oh, wait, you can have this little scrap. I have enough left over. It was so nice. They were just so warm. And the instructor that I had, she just was so like upbeat and uplifting and created this wonderful space for women to come every week and just, have fun with their craft. Then after, making several quilts, I was kind of doing a show and tell of something I had made. And one of the shop owners said, oh my gosh, you should teach that as a class. And I was like, I've never taught anything. But like, what? No, you can do it. You can do it. And she convinced me to teach a class on that particular quilt. Luckily, I had, I knew enough teachers that had come through that I was able to ask a little bit of advice from one of the ladies that was super sweet and had a great following. And I just said, help. I'm teaching my first class. Do you have any advice? And she said, oh, just give really great notes. It was the best piece of advice I ever got because that kind of was my first insight to like, I can teach people to do this, but they kind of need the written word to go along with what I'm saying to be able to follow up on. So that was my first experience as a teacher. I jumped in. I had 6 students in my first class. I was so nervous. 2 of them were the shop owners. I think I was more nervous about that because I felt kind of observed, right? Even though one of them had encouraged me. And then from there, like about 5 minutes in, I was like, I think I can do this. I'm enjoying this. I actually think I might be kind of good at this, I kept teaching. I built a really strong following of just students that would see my quilts hanging in the store, started taking my classes. I started making friends with them. And I did that for several years. I also worked in that shop. When I first started taking the course, I was my mom's marketing director at a real estate brokerage. And then it started like, well, I'll just work a Friday at the quilt store and every other Saturday. And then it became like, well, I'd like to work 3 days at the quilt store. And, so it kind of slowly morphed into less at the marketing job and more within the quilt world. Being able to work in that quilt store opened my eyes to so many things. I was really able to learn the customer. I was able to learn the business side of the business, what it was like to order fabric and notions. Both of the owners were so kind. I think they recognized that I had a strong interest in it, and they allowed me to sit with them when they would have fabric reps come and show the collections and what they would order and why they would order it. Just all of those things. Working with other real creatives in that store was really great because there was always a real strong energy of creativity. One would feed off the other person, and we'd get so excited working together on things.
That's awesome.
I also got to see a lot of teachers come through, and so I got to observe their teaching styles and what they were like and which classes filled. Why did they fill? Who had a stronger following? Why did they have a stronger following? That kind of thing. So it was just like this wealth of information. And my mom always told me I was kind of a sponge. She said I would like observe and like sponge information. And I think that looking back on it, that's exactly what I was doing in that space. I found something I was very passionate about, but I was learning and I was kind of discovering all these things about this industry that I originally had no idea was such a big space. I used to take different courses while I was working in the store because we'd have these amazing teachers come through. And so one day, two things that were kind of pivotal as far as my design, like when I started to design. One, I was starting to get bored doing other people's patterns. I would kind of slightly change them up. I would always have people buy the pattern to take the class, but I would do like a little slight twist. Like, let me add this over here. Let me twist that up. And then they would have to take the course to make that. But still, you know, buying the original pattern so that designer was being compensated. And had two teachers come through. One that I remember this so vividly. Her name was Robin Pandoff. I don't know if she's even quilting anymore. She was an amazing fabric designer. She did a lot of beautiful applique patterns, and we all wanted to take her course because at the time, I mean, she was just like so popular, and it was like, oh my gosh, she's coming to teach here. We jumped into the class, and the first thing she said was, I want you to take your pattern out of the package and I want you to turn it over on the back. It was kind of like a big open folded thing. And she's like, I want you to draw your own pattern. And we all kind of sat there frozen. And I looked around the room and I was like, whoa, like I've never experienced this. And I just remember thinking, I had this moment where I was like, what am I freaking out about? I actually know how to draw. Like, well, let me give this a go. So I started doing my own pattern. After that, I don't know that I ever really fully could submerge myself into anybody else's pattern.
Yeah.
It was such a pivotal moment. The other moment that I had was with a teacher that I didn't have such a great experience with. And that was my very first applique teacher. I was an avid piecer when I started. Lots of pieces, the more the better. Lots of math, lots of pieces. I liked it complicated. And I just took an applique class because I thought I should learn how, because I was working in the shop and I was afraid somebody would ask me a question about supplies or notions. And I wanted to like be able to answer the questions. Yeah. I was in way over my head. Like way over my head. It was like a Baltimore album quilt, which you should never start there. And I was such a perfectionist that I literally cried real tears for not being able to do it because I was used to being good at stuff. If that makes sense. And she was just really rigid and really tight. And like, I just felt like I can't make a mistake. I'm not allowed to make a mistake. Later, looking back, I realized, yes, you are. I wasn't supposed to be good at it. Like I should have been allowed a space to create with less pressure. So I took that piece away for when I started teaching of like, nah, you got to create a space where people are comfortable and happy and calm and are allowed to make mistakes and learn. And that makes them feel so much more at ease in their learning process. So I started doing patterns. The first one was super duper hard. Like, oh my gosh, I thought my head would explode. And I did in the beginning.
Like writing your own?
Yeah. My very first written pattern was a basket pattern. Of course, it couldn't just be like a simple basket. I had to do 3 different baskets, in 3 different sizes. And like, it had to be very complex. And I had to use like 75 fabrics instead of 4. That's just who I am. I have learned to embrace that about myself. I like it complicated. But it was really hard. I just remember like, I'm never going to finish this. This is so difficult. I had no point of reference other than looking at books that I had learned from or patterns that I had worked from. There was no class. It was difficult. It was really difficult. I did start with a partner, very brief partnership. And then, she's a lovely person, but I realized early on, and I think you and I have spoken a little bit about our experiences with partnerships, that it just wasn't meant to be. I could tell that we kind of were on the verge of something good, and we were struggling to make simple decisions together. Like we weren't on the same page. And I could just tell that maybe I wasn't wired to have a partner, maybe that wasn't. And I also got pregnant with my first son. And so I had to learn to be a new mom. My life was going to change. And it just seemed like the best decision was to step away. It was not easy. There was a friendship broken there at the time, which was really hard, but Looking back, it was the absolute best decision that I had ever made. Fast forward about a year and a half, I was pregnant with my second son. We had just moved into the place we still live now. It was kind of like our dream town and that we had saved for. And we were a young couple. I think my older son was like a year and a half, and I was pregnant with my second. And we were like 2 weeks into our house. My husband came home and said, yeah, I got laid off today. And I was like, what?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
And then it was like us very calmly walking the neighborhood, taking the little one for a walk and just saying, well, what could we do? And I said, I think I know what we could do. But you'd have to help me, you'd have to help me with this. And so the Vintage Spool was born.
That's cool. Hold on. I've got to take a minute here. So this was born out of necessity, but I love that it was in a time where I'm going to guess this was very scary.
Yep.
You were like, I'm going to be the breadwinner here. So, okay, this is exciting.
Well, I think I knew that my husband, he's a really hardworking individual, and I knew that he was going to get another job, but I knew that we were going to have to figure something out in the interim, right? And I knew that he was very smart and that we could, and I came from a line of like entrepreneurs. My uncle has his own business. My mother had her own business. I had actually started 2 businesses and then like just stepped away from both of just not finding the right one. So I felt like this is something that we could do, but it was really important that he take me seriously. Cause I think the first time he just thought,
right.
Oh, she's playing at being in business, because we were like, it was funny. Like we would call on stores, we'd get in the car, grab our little patterns, take our little samples and just drop in at a quilt store and say, hey, you want to buy our patterns? There was no real, it was just kind of like, let's put ourselves out there and see what happens. So it came from just that moment that could have been like major crisis mode. And the funny thing is, within like 2 weeks, my husband had another job. But at that point, the entrepreneurial spirit had been ignited and I had a business license and a business name. And I was like, okay, well, let's just go with this, right? And my husband was super pivotal, both in convincing me that I needed to start designing for myself and in convincing me that kind of how to navigate the first part of the business. He was like, oh, no. We're not taking money out to do this. You've got to design a couple. You've got to see if those sell. And then you've got to take that money and you've got to put that money back in the business.
I like it.
And that's exactly what we did. We never took a loan to start the Vintage Spool. We just kind of worked ourselves. And that's where I was kind of going with the relationships being so important. My relationship with my husband and the fact that he is a silent support system. It's always been I'm the face of the brand. I'm the one making everything, but he's behind the scenes. And so I jokingly say, but it is true. Like I run a lot of things by him and I'll say, well, let me check with the boss, like if a pattern's been retired and the folks want it back, I'm like, I gotta talk to the boss. Let me let you know, and I jokingly say it, but it is true. Like we've always together, made these decisions. But in the beginning, I'm going to be really honest. My goal when I started my business was like, if I can pay for the family vacation, that's a win. Right. Like I wasn't aiming high. But there was a point where I was like, whoa, like this thing's kind of taken off. I might be able to pay for a lot more than the family vacation. This is pretty exciting, pretty cool stuff. My parents were amazing. My mom did anything and everything to support me in my teaching, so that like she'd watch my children on certain days of the week so that I could be teaching. When I started doing workshops, she would take them for the weekend, like they would do anything and everything. I think at some point she probably even like folded fabric or patterns. I'm sure she did, along the way. And so did my husband, when it was like, holy cow, we've got a deadline and it's busy and I need help. They all jumped in and were super supportive. Then once I had, I was going to do patterns, I reached out to a local printer that I knew. We had interviewed him to be our printer when I had the first business, and we kind of walked away, but he had taken so much time that I remembered, wow, this is a really caring individual who took a lot of time. Let me go back and circle back around with this guy. He must have thought I was nuts because I was pregnant and I was like, I want to do this. And he's looking at me like, you want to make what? And I remember fast forward like several months when the business started booming, I remember him looking at me going, "Now, what are you selling?"
How many
like,
prints? I'm
what are you
making a
doing?
what?
How
Yeah.
can you call me for more? Like, yeah, it all of a sudden got a lot more interesting, right? But he's still my printer to this day,
Oh, no way.
Yes way. I have used the same printer, the same long armor, and the same photographer since the day I started. My business relationships
That
for
is
me
cool.
are super duper important. They are super duper important to me. So I think it's like those pillars, right? Those pillars of laying the groundwork for a successful business with longevity,
Yeah.
It's just building a kind of a business relationship of trust, making sure they're doing what you need, being, sincere and polite and getting what you need. I joke, but they'll jump through hoops for me. And it's because I'm very loyal and because I'm kind and because I've, built this relationship with them. But if I pick up the phone and say, hey, I need this like by this date, they're like, we'll do anything you need,
Yeah, that's invaluable. I mean, you can't just replace that. That is like years in the making.
Yes, it really is. So after, doing those, I did about 6 patterns and I did 6 more. I got brave enough to do a booth at the International Quilt Market. And that was probably I started the Vintage Spool in 04. I think my first market was probably 05. It was pretty nerve-wracking, but I got really lucky. I don't know what made me ask for a slightly bigger booth. I asked for a booth and a half. And for whatever reason, I got prime real estate. They put me right in the middle of the show. And it was a lane where you had to walk the aisle to get to a very big fabric company. So I had amazing foot traffic.
Awesome.
Also had an awesome friend who helped me set up that booth. And her advice was, make the booth feel like a room, let's make it your studio, make it a space people want to enter and come in and just get more of, something that really shows off who you are. And it really worked. I got a lot of foot traffic and a lot of attention at that show. And then, in that show, I know I got at least one of my distributors from that show, maybe even another. I'm having trouble remembering because it's a long time ago. The other thing that happened at that show was on the third day. That was back in the day, like the day you'd go out and network a little bit, and I think I knew that I had aspirations to do fabric in the future, but I mean, I had very young children with me. I think maybe even like they were at the show with me. Like my mom traveled with me for them to be close by. And so I decided that I would kind of venture out and go just make some connections, And so of course I looking back, it was actually so funny that I actually did this. Because what was I thinking? But because I had no portfolio, I had nothing. I was just like inquiring minds want to know, So I approached the fabric company that I thought at the time was like my dream company, and I just kind of said, who do I need to talk to if I'm interested in doing fabric? And I knew one of the reps, and she's like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. And so I went and, I kind of, excuse me, hey. and I just said, I was just kind of interested. And I got shot down in the most awful way. Like it was brutal. Like I don't think I've ever
what did they say?
Oh, you don't want to know?
No, I do. I really do. We don't know who it is. So
I was really approaching with the idea of, I'd like to know if in the future I wanted to do fabric, if you could give me some advice on what you'd be looking for, things like that. I had used their fabrics for many years, and they were in all of my designs. So it just seemed like it would be the right fit. Here I am showing you what I can do with your fabrics, etc. And she was not kind. And it was kind of
the gist of it.
Okay. So the gist was, I remember it was like a hard no. And it was like, the last words I remember, and these are the ones that stuck with me, is you just keep doing your little patterns. Okay. And it was brutal. Oh. Like I said, it was like gut punch. Looking back, I don't know that she realized she was as harsh as she was, or maybe how hard it was for a designer to approach somebody that way. And also me, like so gutsy to just walk right up. Like I didn't have an appointment. I didn't have a portfolio. Yeah, I think it was just a gutsy thing to do. And I don't think she had any idea of the impact. The good news is by the time I got back to my booth after taking that hard blow, my girlfriend who was helping me said, "Hey, you have an appointment." And I said, "What do you mean I have an appointment?" She said, "Yeah, I just made an appointment for you. The owner of Free Spirit Fabrics was just here. She loves your booth and she wants to talk to you." And I said, "What?" So I recovered pretty quickly because at the time,
Yeah, you did.
Free Spirit was a very up and coming company. I knew exactly who they were. And I went and talked to her and it was like night and day. She couldn't have been kinder. She was so enthusiastic about my work. She loved what I was doing and she wanted me to try to create it in fabric. And so I sat with her, interviewed with her. We talked at length. I told her I wasn't expecting to be offered like a fabric company that early and that I have very young children and I'm not sure because I knew, I had friends in the industry and I'm like, I know there's deadlines. And so she was super kind, super accommodating. Go home, chat with your husband. And I remember going home and talking with Miguel and just saying, I feel like this is like one of those opportunities that just doesn't come around like this very often. I think I maybe need to say yes to this. And so I did. I said yes and figured it out. I had no formal training. It was not easy. There was no.
How did you do that? Like, how did that work? I can't even so you were a fabric designer for Free Spirit,
Yeah,
which is a big deal.
I did lines for them for about 13 years, I think. I stepped off. It was kind of a mutual decision right before the pandemic to stop doing the fabric. But yeah, it was crazy. I just adapted, figured it out. And I was really lucky. The engraver was super, super kind that worked there. And we kind of, formulated the system and it just became kind of like a system of how we do things. And then I would take my collections and create a pattern, usually around them, usually one of my block of the months or things like that. But it wasn't easy because I was known as the kind of the more traditional artist there. So I kind of feel like I always kind of stood out a little bit. Or maybe just didn't.
Okay,
I just remember when the booth would be up, everybody's would be bold and vibrant and everything. And my aesthetic was so different. And I even remember some of the reps saying, "And this is our traditional artist," which just was it made me just feel even more oh gosh, I don't really fit in. But we figured it out. We made it work. It was a good experience. I look back on it as a real positive. But there are parts of me that it was very freeing to stop doing fabric.
Oh, okay. Interesting. How so?
Well, because my work with the patterns, it's really about using so many fabrics and so many details and trying to do that. And I think I did a pretty darn good job of it. But in the beginning, I think we were allowed maybe I don't know, maybe 12, 18 SKUs. And then slowly it started to go down. It was 12 SKUs. And now the industry wants 8 SKUs. And my work, that's just really complicated to do with just so few SKUs. And I just that was kind of my aesthetic and my style. And that's what my customers wanted. And I think looking back, if you look at my patterns created before I did fabric for the Vintage Spool, the Vintage Spool patterns, and after I stopped doing fabric, they are definitely, I think, my strongest work.
That's very interesting.
And I think part of that was, the freedom and the ability to create from, and I describe it as this, instead of the crayon box that has 12 crayons, I'm now with 164, that big box that you got when you're a kid and you're like, oh man, And so I think that's very freeing. For me. And so I do miss doing fabric sometimes. I look back or every once in a while I'm hunting and I can't find what I need. And and I think about it. I do think about it. But I don't know, it's also nice to now it's the other part that I think was difficult is I love being my own boss. I love setting my own deadlines. I'm pretty organized. I'm pretty structured. I know what I can manage. It was difficult to work within a kind of a more corporate world where you kind of knew, I knew a lot, what would sell or how it would sell. And a lot of times it would be every market, you'd roll in new peeps that you needed to meet, the new sales this and the representative from this district and the European such and such. And I mean, they were all phenomenal and really great, but you kind of felt like every circle we'd start over again. And it was just hard.
Well, okay, I'm interested in this. So, like, as a fabric designer for AGF, I'm not meeting with anyone. So did you have responsibilities to like meet and try and promote your fabric?
So they definitely, I mean, there were opportunities that would come up. For example, at the time, Free Spirit was a division of Coates and Clark. So my pieces were popular in Europe, for example. And so they'd want to have lines, in Europe as well. And so there would be opportunities that would come up of like, you could take this pattern and adapt it here, or just different little opportunities like that. And I always just kind of felt like you didn't want to say no, right? You didn't want to say no,
Gotcha.
But I don't think, I mean, I understand that from their corporate world, they have numbers they're looking at, sales figures they're looking at. They have no idea how much time as designers we're spending on pattern designing, creating samples, photographing, all of that. So I always felt like there was a slight disconnect between the pieces. And that was hard because I always felt like they just didn't get me. They didn't understand the volume of fabric that I could have moved had they embraced this type of pattern. And just if we get behind this artist with this type of pattern, it's mind blowing how much product you could actually move and sell. But I just never feel like that was something that they understood, I mean,
I feel like then there's potential for you to still do that. I mean, do you have your eye on like, well, maybe I would want to still do fabric?
I have thought about it. And there was a point where there was a changing of ownership with the Free Spirit company. And there was a point where we thought that it would be no more. And so the artists were kind of in this odd sort of limbo period, at which point we were being approached by other companies. And I was at that time approached by a company that understood who I was and was like, we could do X, Y, and Z. And I did think about it in that moment, but then this buyout happened and the artists needed to remain under contract for a period longer. But it has always kind of been in the back of my mind. If I found the right company who really understood, and also in like one of the things that I did not do, I look at it as both a mistake, but not a mistake, was I was not on social media. I'd never used social media personally, and I never used it for business until just recently, until like kind of right before I reached out to you. It's mind blowing, the connections and the volume and things that you can do using social media. So I look back and think, well, that was a mistake, but I also think, I remember one of the reasons, and I kind of watched some of these young designers and what they're kind of dealing with and going through. And I was never competitive with anybody else. Like I never looked at anybody else and said, oh, I want to be her. But I was very competitive with myself. Like I always needed to do the best job that I could. And I think as a young mom and a young entrepreneur, I could sense that it wasn't good for me because I felt like if I saw people doing certain things, I might feel like, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing it. And it was always like another bar that you needed to hit or another hoop that you needed to jump through. And I'm probably going to get a little bit emotional because my family is so important to me. And I never, ever wanted to put anything before them, whether it was my husband, my children, or my parents. I just didn't, and I think I sensed that wouldn't be good for me. I'm just too much of like an overachiever, too much of like and it's just would have been like a bar that would be insurmountable.
Yep. Always moving up,
always constantly moving that bar. And I just I don't know that it's healthy because I can even think about like, I just recently had this amazing launch on this one particular pattern. And inside I'm like, how am I going to top that? How am I going to top that? Like, that's crazy. I shouldn't feel that way. I should be so excited, right? But that's just who I am as a human being. It's who I am as an individual. It's how I'm wired. I think I've gotten so much better about it as I've gotten older, right? Like you look and you go, yeah, I don't, they're doing that. Okay, cool. I don't need to do that,
Right.
But I think when you're younger, when you're newer in the industry and when you're kind of trying to figure out your niche, and we talk a lot about niche, and I kind of feel like I sort of found my niche after a little while. In the beginning, when I started quilting, I dabbled in everything. I made a quilt out of flannel, and I made a quilt that was
Yeah.
primitive, and I made a quilt that was batik. I made a 30s quilt. I dabbled in everything. I remember when I made one with kind of softer florals, something happened inside. Like I got very ooh, I got very excited. And it sort of just kind of like that scope just sort of narrowed. And then it was like, yes, this is what I really like. This is what I love. I started with patchwork. I didn't even think I would like applique. There was a moment where I just realized, whoa, this is like the perfect mesh of my skills. I'm great at pulling color and combining color. I know how to draw and kind of tell a story in fabric. And, I've got these quilting skills and now these hand sewing skills. And I find this technique really soothing. I spent a lot of hours perfecting my technique, and then I was able to teach other people. So I think we find that niche, carefully and kind of slowly. And then all of a sudden that it just narrows down and you go, this is where I am. The interesting thing is when I started the Vintage Spool, my slogan, and that was in 2004, romantic and timeless design. And I was just looking at that the other day and I was like, yep, I'm still on target. That's exactly what the brand says. It's like vintage inspired. It uses soft color and there's a lot of florals and things that are pretty. And I mean, you can see behind me because you can see my space. My space is very much that space, but I'm not really a girly girl.
Right.
I'm not. Like, I joke and I'm like, I would take, pizza and beer over champagne and the opera anytime. I'm just not. I like a sports game and I like, sticky bar floors and it doesn't, I have a design persona and then who I really am.
Right.
I'm not soft and delicate in any way.
But, I love that exploration of the niche because so many times, well, for one, you've got to have one to have success, but people try to rush in or pick one and you just can't. You've got to experiment and try the things and you'll figure out what you're drawn to because sometimes it might be very different from your personality,
Yeah. And I've really learned to listen to my instincts, with design. I can feel when something's got to come out. It's like a feeling, it's not even an idea. It's just like a feeling I get that kind of comes over me where I'm like, stop the presses. Everybody get out of the way. I gotta jot this down. I gotta put this into a graph paper. I gotta pull fabric. It just sort of but you learn to, again, I think with time and with experience and with age, we get wiser. We get more tired. I used to applique until midnight. Now I'm dozing off with an easel in my hand at 9:45. It's pretty sad.
No, it happens. It does happen. Yeah. Well, and I want to be sure to touch on too, this aspect of teaching. I do not do in-person teaching. I don't know if I ever will, but it was kind of your foot in the door with having a career here, but it's also, we've chatted and you have talked about how lucrative that can be. So I'd love for you to just paint a picture of what this could look like for someone who is a designer.
Absolutely. So where it started to do more event style teaching, again, from my husband, I would get a lot of offers from guilds. Come to our guild, give a lecture, come teach a class. And it was just too hard with young children and leaving. And I remember going to a market thinking I was going to come back to this very happy family. And it was just a disaster. My mother and her husband got along great, and I got back and they were just at odds. The kids were and I was like, okay, this probably isn't such a good idea. So my husband was the one who suggested, why don't you have people come to you? And I was like, oh, well, there's a novel concept. And I had, when I started quilting, attended the most wonderful event called the Liberty Gathering. And what the Liberty Gathering was this little town in Missouri called Liberty, Missouri. And they would get a bunch of teachers come and they would do all these little events around this time with all these students coming and taking these classes. And they would do little kits and they would let you shop at the store special time and they would do dinners. And so I knew I couldn't do something as elaborate as that, but I love my town. And so I decided that I would work to figure out a way to get folks to come to me. And so what I did is I started teaching these workshops, these retreats that we called them. And I found a space where part of the space was a classroom And the other part of the space was a mini store. And the women loved the mini store because we would rope it off and we would fill it with all kinds of treasures. And those attendees often got first shot at one of my pattern creations. And they were really lovely because they were total guinea pigs sometimes. I'm like, okay, there's no photograph, there's no pattern cover, but you're going to get the insides of the pattern and you're going to have a kit that goes with it. And they were just thrilled to like be there and excited to be part of it. We developed the most amazing community of people that would just continue to come back. And then they would bring friends the next time or family members, and they would bring their husbands, and the husbands would go hiking or golfing. I mean, it was just super fun.
That's awesome.
Super fun. And I just realized early on in those workshops that many of the folks that were there were not necessarily coming to me for instruction. They were coming to me because I created a space where they could do something they loved for several days without interruption, without the stresses of their own lives, whatever those might be, whether it was, taking care of young children or caring for an elderly parent or work stresses. And they could do it amongst other people that were doing exactly the same thing. And we're so happy to be doing it. So I think just creating that space allowed folks to just be like, this is so much fun. And then I also worked in conjunction with both my local quilt shops, and it brought them a lot of business as well, because we would go and visit their store, little private showing, little private shopping tour. They would welcome them with open arms and give them little treasures. I mean, it was just so much fun. And those teaching relationships, both from the early days and then through the workshops, I believe that those are forever long time customers. They still reach out all the time. I still see, when I do a pattern launch, I still see their names coming through. I'll get sweet emails. They'll share photos. They'll send Christmas cards. I mean, it's just a lovely group of people that I've met over the years. And I just have so many beautiful experiences with my customers and my students over the years. I'm going to share one because it just totally stands out to me. It was just a moment that I did something for a customer that probably most people wouldn't, but it paid off in droves later on. I had young children. This woman called. She needed help picking fabrics for one of my quilts, and she was local. And she asked if I would meet her at the store, the local store, and help her. Most people would have been like, yeah, lady, I'm sorry. I just can't do that for you. And I remember I needed to go somewhere with my husband. I was like, Miguel, I just need to do this. Something tells me she's so kind. I just need to do this. I'll do it as quickly as I can. And so I went and I met her and I helped her pick these fabrics. And at the time, it was my most difficult, most popular pattern. It's a very heirloom pattern. It's called Vintage Valentine. It totally just kind of put me on the map. Like it was that big of a pattern. Cool. And at the time, she's like, I want to make one of these for every one of my grandchildren. And I was like, I feel like I made one of those.
How many grandkids?
Yeah. And I just remember inside going, sure, okay. But let's start with what, right? I kid you not. Fast forward. And that pattern was my second pattern I ever released. That pattern came out in 2004. And I think it came out in 2004. It was one of the original 6. Fast forward to the year that I lost my mom. And I'm at a local quilt show and my booth is up, and it's really hard to just put that face on because I've got a lot going on behind the scenes. And I'm approached by a woman and she says, I don't know if you remember me. And immediately I recognize her face and she's like, I'm the lady, you helped me pick my fabric for my very first one. And she pulls out a photograph, and I kid you not, it's 4 granddaughters, 2 on each side of her, each draped in a Vintage Valentine quilt. And I was so moved.
Did you cry? I would have.
It just, oh my God, I lost it because I had just lost my mom and I knew how important my kid's grandmother was to them. But it was just, let's look at a light, oh my gosh, wow.
That is so cool. Yeah, we crave that. I feel like so much with social media, and it's not going away. If anything, there's artificial intelligence and but we're social beings, and those social connections, it's priceless, and I love the idea of having something where people come to you, so you don't have to pay for the travel and all that. You can be close to home. It's feasible for you, and it's a
Yeah.
fun getaway for the people who are coming. And
Yeah,
to team
they
up with a
love it.
local, as soon as you said like a private shopping event, like it
Oh,
sounds
yes.
very like chic, you know, like, ooh,
Well,
I like
they
that.
also got a goodie bag that I would take good care. Every table had a door prize that was the arrangement on the center. So they would, I'd change them up every time because we'd have a theme, whether it was Easter or Paris, or so the centerpiece would always be theme related. And then they were going to be door prizes that they could win. And we always did one fancy day of food, which was like a tea or a luncheon, and it was always on theme. They just felt so special being there, and they looked forward to it so much, and they really enjoyed their time. It was a ton of work on the back end, I will say. I would love when people would be
Right.
like, have fun at your retreat, and I was like, it is fun, but you're having the fun. I'm doing the work,
Right. Yeah.
But it was great. It was, I honestly highly
And
recommend it. Yeah.
and lucrative, like it's not a
Very.
money pit. This is something that you earn money with.
Oh yeah, because you had the fee that they would pay to attend the workshop, especially if you were doing a project that would kitted, so you'd have the kit that they would pay for to do that. And then this is something I learned very early on. And it's the reason this came is because I taught a workshop for another shop out of area. And I had these students for 3 days. And those students were at a hotel, and they would leave the venue to go find quilt stores and go shop. So they wanted to buy stuff. And I'm like, and it was a quilt shop. And I'm like, why do these people not have product in here? Why are they letting this live customer that they have for 3 days go elsewhere? So I remembered that. And I was like, no. This is a live audience. And my assistant at the time would tease me. She's like, Verna, you could hold up a number 2 pencil and those girls will just flock to the store. And I never sold anything that I didn't use myself. But for some reason, like when you're demoing, it's right there. They need it. They want it. And they're there to spend money. I remember going to the International Quilt Festival the very first time. And I remember standing out in front of the Houston Convention Center. And there was Greyhound bus after Greyhound bus lined up outside, all full of quilters. And I remember how much money I had in my pocket. And I was not wealthy. And I had $1,000 in my pocket in cash.
Right. Yeah.
And so I remember thinking, that's a lot of 1,000 times, all these buses. And people, they go to spend money. That's what they want to do. They want to buy their products. They want to buy their kits. They want to buy the latest fabrics. What notions are new? We love this. We spend all our time doing this. Of course, we want to spend money on it, so as a designer and as an entrepreneur, I think you always have to think if I didn't want to make money at this, I could have just kept it as my hobby. I've always thought of this as this is my career. This is my job. I don't feel guilty or bad for making a living. I work really hard at this. And like I said, I will never promote a product that I haven't used. I will never try to sell you something that I am not behind or that I don't think is going to improve your quilting experience. With my patterns early on, I set out, I worked off a lot of patterns that weren't very well written. So early on, I'm like, no. If I write a bad pattern, people are just going to buy the first one and be like, well, it was really pretty, but gosh, that pattern was terrible. They're not going to buy another one. So I set out to try to write the best possible pattern so that people would buy that one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So I don't know. I think I've done some things right.
I love that. Yeah, you have. Well, and you've been in this longer than I have, like you've been doing this I remember when you reached out and hearing the things you've done, I was like, wow. I mean, that's a whole lot of knowledge that I don't have and experience and these live events. And it's just, I love that you're unapologetically like, this is my business and I work hard at this and I work hard to bring forth a good product and I am not apologizing.
When I expressed interest in, doing this, when he saw my passion, my brother, again, life-changing moment, me this book called The Business of Bliss. And it was all these women who had taken their hobby and created a business out of it. And I read it cover to cover. I remember thinking, yes, I think I can do this, and that was a life-changing moment. It really was. It wasn't without
I'm gonna
mistakes
have to
or
read
without
that.
hard work. I mean, in the early
Oh, sure,
stages,
yeah.
I was recently taking a class and I was just so touched by this designer that was taking the course, and she had her newborn sitting on her lap. And I can remember, like in the early days, how important it was for me to make sure my kids never felt in any way neglected or jealous of my work or my business. And so I would incorporate and include them as much as possible. They were always right with me, side by side. I would let them in the early days. I would let them decorate the house with fat quarters. Like, here you go. These are what you can touch, but over here, these are mommy's tools that are dangerous. We don't touch the rotary cutters, things like that. As time progressed, then they would come to the workshops and they could help the ladies. They walk around and give the little numbers for the ladies to do their door prizes. As they got a little bit older, then they could actually write things on the ladies' tabs because they were getting older. As they got a little bit older, then they could work the cash register, and so on and so
That's
forth.
awesome.
It was awesome, so, it's difficult. I work from my home. I've thought at times it would have been really nice to have an office to go to when I'm in the
Right?
laundry room trying to take a call with a customer, praying that my kid doesn't cry in the background, in the early days. But luckily,
Yes. Well,
most of our
yeah.
customers are moms or, dads, and have those same. And nowadays, with everybody working from home, I think people are more used to it and whatnot. And my third child, who has just stepped
Yeah.
away, my dog Oliver, who I don't know if you could hear him a little while ago, but he was making a hard sell for an early lunch, and I was trying to keep talking. Crying in the
I know I
background.
didn't hear that actually.
That's good because I was trying really hard to just talk over his little whining.
It's crying. But I love too
Yeah.
how you're able to show your kids this thing that you're passionate about, that you don't have to sacrifice that. You can, be a mom and involve them and let them see this thing that you're passionate about, and I really like that. But I thank you for coming here and sharing your experience, particularly, I mean, your story of the things that you've done, but this idea of teaching, doing these live events. It's very, very fun. It sounds like a party, and I would love to go to one. So so, okay, for our listeners, if they want to come and see your things and all that you do, where can they find you?
So right now, I am not doing any in-person teaching events. I may start that again in the future. Unfortunately, that was kind of curbed here in California during the pandemic, so I did take a step back from that. But for right now, you can find me on my website, thevintagespool.com, and you can find my daily goings-on Instagram at thevintagespool. I love to share works in progress and kind of what I've got going on, which has been really fun. I never used to do that. And Instagram was kind of giving me that space, and kind of like I've gotten a little bolder with it, and it's been great. I get a lot of really great feedback, and I think people enjoy watching the journey. So if you want to kind of along and see what I'm doing, you can definitely find me in those spots. But I really appreciate you having me as a guest today, Elizabeth. I love what you are doing and sharing with the industry, and I'm just thrilled to be able to be here today and to share a little bit about my story, and hopefully it will be inspiring or helpful to somebody who's in the mix or thinking about starting, and I'm always open to people reaching out. I try hard to give back to younger designers, because I was really lucky that I had a few people that just gave great bits of wisdom and advice. And I know how hard it is to not know anybody or to not know if you're doing the right thing. So I always encourage folks to reach out. Yeah.
You are. I mean, you've just been such a sweet, sincere friend to me. I mean, it's like you have a gift for connecting with people and genuinely caring. And so, yeah, thank you for being my friend, for reaching out, and for being willing to share this.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate you as well. I love it. I think I reached out because I sensed one time just a little hesitation on one of your podcasts, and I was like, no, keep going. You're doing great. I love what you're doing, and I want this to keep going. I want this podcast because I enjoy it so much. So So I'm glad that I reached
Oh,
out
you're
that day and we
sweet.
connected. And I look forward to meeting you in person finally this year. I'm really
Same.
excited
I
about
can't
that.
believe we haven't met in person. I
I
lose.
know it's
There's
kind of
people who I'm
funny.
like, oh no, we've met, but we
I
haven't.
know.
So yeah, okay.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see ya.
All right. Take care.
Verna, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. It was so fun chatting, as always. And we just got in touch the other day. She was telling me where her son got into college. She's just such a fun person and so talented. If you haven't seen her Instagram, go take a look. She's got such cool applique. In fact, little spoiler alert, if you're in the Quilters Candy membership, she is preparing a brand new applique pattern just for us coming up in a few months. So go take a look at her lovely designs. And Verna, thank you so much for being so open and sharing your business ideas and your story of, how you've grown your business. It was just so much fun having you. It was lovely having you on the podcast. So everyone have a wonderful week. I'll see you right back here next Friday on the Craft a Career podcast. Until then, take care.